You know, they say graduation is supposed to be the first day of the rest of your life. A celebration of everything you've achieved and everything you're about to become. For me, standing on the rooftop of the Peninsula Chicago, surrounded by the city's glittering skyline and the hum of polite applause, it felt more like a funeral. Not for me, specifically, but for the family I thought I knew. My name is Harper Lee. I'm 23 years old, fresh out of the University of Chicago with a degree in environmental biological sciences. That piece of paper cost me 4 years of sleepless nights, student loans, and a war with my own parents that I didn't even realize I was fighting until it was almost too late. If you looked at us that night, you would have seen the perfect American family. My father, Richard Lee, the titan of the pharmaceutical industry, looking dashing in his tailored tuxedo. My mother, Victoria, dripping in diamonds, playing the part of the benevolent philanthropist to perfection. And my sister, Sophia, the golden child, the Harvard graduate, the heir apparent. And then there was me, the spare, the disappointment, or so I thought. But as I stood there, clutching a crystal glass of vintage red wine, listening to the small orchestra play something soothing and expensive, I realized I wasn't just a disappointment to them, I was a threat. I want you to picture this moment. The waiter had just set the glass down in front of me. My father had insisted on pouring it himself, a rare vintage, he claimed, just for me. A gesture of love from a man who had never shown me any. But as the glass touched the table, I saw it. It was quick. If you blinked, you would have missed it. A slight tilt of my mother's hand, a flicker of white powder slipping from beneath her diamond ring into my drink. It dissolved instantly, but I saw it. In that split second, the world didn't stop. The music kept playing, people kept smiling, but my blood ran cold. They weren't just trying to cut me off or disown me, they were trying to kill me, right here, in front of everyone. I didn't scream, I didn't flip the table. Instead, I did the only thing I could do. I smiled. I picked up that glass, turned to my beautiful, perfect sister Sophia, and handed it to her. "You deserve this more," I told her, and she drank it. But before I tell you what happened next, before the sirens and the chaos and the fall of an empire, I need you to understand how we got here. I need you to understand that monsters aren't born overnight. Sometimes they're made in boardrooms. Sometimes they're the people who tuck you in at night. So, let me take you back to the beginning. Growing up in the Lee household was like living in a museum. Everything was pristine, expensive, and cold. To the outside world, my father was a visionary, the CEO of Lee Pharmaceuticals, a man who graced the cover of Forbes, who lectured at Ivy League universities about the future of medicine. He was the pride of the industry. But at home, he was a calculator in a human suit. To him, family wasn't about love or connection. It was about legacy. It was about return on investment. And then there was my mother, Victoria. She came from old money, a lineage of doctors and socialites. She was beautiful, elegant, and absolutely terrifying. She taught us early on that image was everything. If you weren't perfect, you didn't exist. That was my problem. I existed, but I was never perfect. Not in the way they wanted. In their eyes, Sophia was the masterpiece. She was brilliant, graceful, compliant. She went to the right schools, played the right sports, made the right friends. She was the natural continuation of the Lee bloodline. Me? I was just Harper, the second draft, the glitch in the system. I remember this one afternoon when I was in elementary school. I had just come home from a cross-country meet, covered in mud, clutching a silver medal. I had run my heart out. I felt like I was flying. I burst through the front door, desperate to show them. "Mom! Dad! Look!" I ran into the living room and froze. My parents were popping a bottle of champagne. Sophia was sitting on the piano bench, beaming. She had been chosen to play at a community event. Not a competition, just a recital. But you would have thought she just won a Nobel Prize. My father glanced at me, his eyes skimming over the silver medal like it was a piece of trash. He took a sip of his drink and said, "Good, Harper, but don't fool yourself. Running won't get you a career." My mother didn't even look up from the dress she was pinning on Sophia. "Go wash up," she said. "You're getting mud on the carpet." That was the moment the seed was planted. The realization that no matter how fast I ran, I would never catch up to Sophia. Not because I wasn't fast enough, but because they had already decided the winner before the race even started. By high school, the dynamic was set in stone. The walls of our hallway were a shrine to Sophia. Tennis trophies, debate team plaques, her acceptance letter to Harvard framed in gold. My awards, state science fairs, academic honors, were shoved in a drawer in the study. I remember my sophomore year, I won first place in the entire state for a research project on antibiotic resistance in local pond water. It was a huge deal. My mother actually came to the ceremony. I stood on that stage, holding the plaque, scanning the crowd for her face. When I finally found her, she wasn't smiling. She looked bored. When I got off stage, waiting for a hug, she leaned in close. I thought she was going to whisper, "I'm proud of you." Instead, she hissed, "Your hair looks messy. You look sloppy, Harper. Fix it." It was like a knife to the gut. They didn't care about who I was. They only cared about what I could do for the family image. And apparently, digging through pond water didn't fit the aesthetic. They had my life mapped out, too. I was supposed to study pharmaceuticals, just like Dad. I was supposed to join the company, work in the labs, and support Sophia's eventual rise to CEO. I was supposed to be the worker bee to her queen. When I told them I wanted to study environmental science, that I cared about ecosystems and industrial waste, my father laughed. It was a cold, dismissive sound. "That's for people who write useless reports," he said. "You need to do real work. You need to contribute to this family's wealth, not hug trees." When I got into the University of Chicago and declared my major, he exploded. He threatened to cut me off. "Not a dime," he screamed. "If you want to waste your life on garbage, you can pay for it yourself." And I did. I got scholarships. I took out loans. I worked in the campus library until midnight. I held my ground. But it was lonely. I felt like an orphan with living parents. I often wondered if I was born just to make Sophia look brighter. She was the light, and I was the shadow. But there was one person who saw me. One person who didn't care about the Lee Empire or the stock prices. My grandmother, Margaret. Margaret was a force of nature. Long before I was born, she was one of the most brilliant chemists in Illinois. She did groundbreaking work in compound development. In fact, her early research laid the foundation for the very drug that launched Lee Pharmaceuticals. But you won't find her name in the company history books. You won't see her statue in the lobby. My father and grandfather erased her. She told me the story once. We were in the basement of her old house, the air smelling of dust and dried lavender. She opened a heavy wooden trunk and pulled out stacks of notebooks filled with elegant, strong handwriting. "They took it all, Harper," she said, tracing the formulas with a shaking finger. "They took my work, patented it, and scrubbed my name off everything. Because back then, people didn't believe a woman could lead a lab. They thought I should be home baking cookies." I was furious. I asked her, "Do you regret it? Do you hate them?" She looked at me, her eyes sharp and clear. "No, science isn't about glory, it's about helping people. But I do regret one thing. I regret letting them decide my worth." She grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Listen to me, Harper. Never let anyone tell you your passion is meaningless. If you want to save the earth, you save it. If you want to fight, you fight. Don't become anyone's shadow, not even this family's." Those words became my armor. When my father called me useless, I heard Margaret's voice. When my mother looked at me with disgust, I remembered the fire in my grandmother's eyes. But Margaret left me something else, too. Something my parents didn't know about until it was too late. When I was 16, just before she passed away from cancer, she called me to her bedside. She was frail, her skin like paper, but her spirit was still there. "Harper," she whispered, "I won't let you be trapped. I won't let them own you." She told me she had set up a trust fund, $10 million, money she had quietly invested and grown over decades, separate from the family fortune. But there was a catch. It was locked until I either turned 25 or graduated from college, whichever came last. "This is your freedom key," she said. Promise me you'll walk your own path." I promised her, and then she was gone. My parents didn't find out about the money until 3 months before my graduation. It was a mistake, really. The family attorney, assuming they knew, mentioned the Margaret Trust during a financial meeting. I wasn't there, but I heard about the fallout. My father apparently turned purple. My mother went silent. They realized that the moment I walked across that stage and grabbed my diploma, I would be worth $10 million. I would be independent. I wouldn't need their money, their approval, or their company. I would have the power to say no. And that terrified them. But the money was only half the problem. The real danger, the thing that turned them from strict parents into conspirators, was what I found in the river. During my final semester, I joined a field research project studying the Calumet River. It flows through the industrial south side of Chicago, a place heavy with factories and gray skies. We were testing for standard pollutants, heavy metals, runoff, that sort of thing. But almost immediately, the data looked wrong. I was running samples in the university lab late one night. The mass spectrometer was spitting out results, and I kept seeing these strange spikes. High levels of mercury and lead, sure, but there was something else. Traces of complex pharmaceutical compounds, synthetic molecules that shouldn't be in a river. They should be in a hazardous waste containment unit. I recognized the chemical signatures. I had seen them before in industry journals. They were byproducts of drug manufacturing. My professor said, "We've suspected illegal dumping for years, but we've never had the proof to pin it on anyone." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I knew who operated the biggest plants in that district. I knew whose logo was painted on the side of those massive warehouses. Lee Pharmaceuticals. I started digging. I became obsessed. I took extra shifts at the lab. I went back to the river, following the current upstream, taking samples closer and closer to the west facility of my father's company. The closer I got to their discharge pipes, the worse the water became. It was toxic soup. And then I found it. A massive concentration of a compound called cyclopentylamine derivative 47. It was an experimental drug. I knew about it because I had hacked into my father's digital files once to help Sophia with a project she was struggling with. It was supposed to be a revolutionary heart medication, Project R17. But the data I saw in the river meant they were dumping raw, failed experimental batches straight into the water supply. This wasn't just negligence. This was a crime. People lived along that river. Kids played there. People fished there. I was torn apart. This was my family. This was the money that paid for the roof over my head for 18 years. If I exposed this, I would destroy everything. But if I stayed silent, I was complicit. I was just like them. I remembered Margaret. Science is about serving people. I made my choice. I decided to give them one chance to fix it before I went to the EPA. It was a Sunday dinner, rare for us all to be together. I waited until dessert. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled a folder out of my bag and slid it across the mahogany table. "I know what you're doing at the West facility," I said. My voice shook, but I forced myself to look my father in the eye. He didn't even blink. He picked up the folder, glanced at the charts, and then dropped it back onto the table. "You're playing detective now, Harper?" "It's not a game," I said. "You're dumping cyclopentyl 47 into the Calumet. It's toxic. It's illegal. You have to stop." My mother set down her fork. "Lower your voice. You're being dramatic." "I'm being a scientist," I snapped. "I have the data. If you don't shut down that discharge pipe and start a cleanup, I'm going to report it." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Sophia looked between us, her eyes wide. "Daddy? Is that true?" My father ignored her. He looked at me with a look I will never forget. It wasn't anger, it was calculation. He was assessing the damage. He was figuring out how much it would cost to make me go away. "You don't understand how the world works, Harper," he said softly. "This family survives because we do what is necessary. Silence is part of the business." "Silence isn't family," I shot back. "Silence is complicity." I stood up and left the table. I thought I had won. I thought I had scared them into doing the right thing. I was so naive. After that night, things shifted. They stopped yelling at me. They stopped threatening to cut me off. Suddenly, my mother was calling to ask about my favorite flowers. My father sent me a text saying, "Congratulations on your upcoming graduation." It was bizarre. It felt like walking onto a movie set where everyone had swapped scripts. They insisted on throwing this massive party at the peninsula. "A celebration worthy of you," my mother said. Her voice was sweet, like syrup masking the taste of medicine. I knew something was wrong. My instincts were screaming at me to run. But I had to finish my degree. I had to get that diploma to unlock the trust fund. So, I prepared. I made copies of my data. I gave a flash drive to my professor. I hid another one in my dorm room. I was playing spy in my own life. And then, 3 days before the party, I went home to pick up a dress. The house was quiet. I walked past my father's study and heard voices. "Richard, are you sure?" It was my mother. She sounded anxious. "We have no choice, Victoria." My father's voice was low, lethal. "She has the evidence, and in 3 days, she gets the money. If she has $10 million and that data, she can bury us. She's not a daughter anymore. She's a liability." I froze. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. "But to kill her?" my mother whispered. "Not kill," he corrected her, sounding like he was discussing a business merger. "Incapacitate. The compound degrades quickly. We slip it into her toast. She gets sick, hospitalized, heart failure or respiratory distress. While she's under, we get power of attorney. We seize the trust. We destroy her credibility. If she dies, well, the money reverts to the parents. That's the law." My knees almost gave out. I felt like I was going to throw up. My own parents. They were planning to poison me with the very chemical I had found in the river. It was poetic, in a sick, twisted way. I wanted to burst in there and scream. I wanted to call the police right then. But I knew I couldn't. It was my word against theirs. They were billionaires. They owned half the judges in Chicago. Without concrete proof of their intent, they would spin it. They would say I was crazy, unstable. They would lock me away. No, I needed to catch them. I needed them to show their hand. I backed away silently. I walked out of that house and sat in my car, shaking for 20 minutes. Then I wiped my face, put on my game face, and drove back to campus. I spent the next 3 days in a daze of terror and adrenaline. I told my best friend, Emily. She didn't believe me at first. Who would? But when she saw the look in my eyes, she agreed to help. "We need to record it," I told her. "We need to catch them in the act." And that brings us back to the rooftop. The lights, the music, the lie. I arrived at the party in a navy blue dress, my head held high. I felt like a soldier walking into an ambush. My parents were watching me like hawks. Every time I moved, their eyes followed. They were waiting for the moment. My father called for the toast. He made a big speech about pride and future. He opened that special bottle. I sat there, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I watched my mother's hand. I watched the powder fall. And now, the glass was in front of me. The poison was swirling in the vintage red wine. My father raised his glass. "To Harper," he boomed. "To Harper," the guests echoed. I looked at the glass. I looked at my parents. They looked expectant, eager. I turned to Sophia. She was smiling at me, innocent and oblivious. She had no idea she was sitting next to a murder target. She had no idea the people she worshipped were monsters. In a way, she was a victim too, a victim of their lies. "Sophia," I said, my voice steady, loud enough for the table to hear. "You've been my rock. I couldn't have done this without you. You deserve this toast more than I do." I held out the glass. Sophia's face lit up. "Oh, Harper, that's so sweet." She reached out. Her fingers brushed mine. I saw my mother's eyes go wide. I saw my father's jaw drop. They froze. They wanted to stop her. But they couldn't. Not without admitting that the wine was tainted. Not without exposing everything in front of the cameras, the investors, the press. They were trapped in their own trap. Sophia took the glass. She raised it to her lips. "Cheers," she said, and she drank deep. You know that saying, "Be careful what you wish for"? My parents spent their entire lives wishing for control. They wanted to control the company, control the narrative, control me. And in that moment, as Sophia swallowed that wine, they had absolutely no control. I set my own glass down on the table, the safe glass, the one originally meant for Sophia, and I just watched them. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. That was the most excruciating part. The toxin, cyclopentylamine derivative 47, isn't instantaneous like cyanide in the movies. It takes time to enter the bloodstream. It waits. Sophia was laughing. She was chatting with the guests, flushed with the excitement of the toast. "This wine is incredible," she said, holding the empty glass up to the light. "Notes of cherry? Oak?" I looked at my father. He was sweating, visibly sweating. A bead of perspiration rolled down his temple and disappeared into his starch-stiff collar. He couldn't take his eyes off Sophia. He looked like a man watching a bomb countdown that he couldn't stop. My mother was worse. She was gripping her napkin so hard her knuckles were white. She kept trying to signal the waiter, maybe to get Sophia some water, maybe to, I don't know, induce vomiting? But she couldn't. Not with 50 of Chicago's elite watching her every move. I leaned in, keeping my voice low and pleasant. "Is something wrong, Mother? You look pale." She snapped her head toward me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "You," she whispered, her voice barely a hiss. "What have you done?" "Me?" I feigned innocence. "I just shared a drink with my sister. Isn't that what family does?" And then it started. Sophia stopped laughing mid-sentence. Her hand went to her chest, rubbing her sternum absent-mindedly. "Wow," she murmured, blinking rapidly. "Is it hot in here? I feel dizzy." My stomach dropped. Even though I hated how she had been favored, even though I knew this was necessary to expose them, seeing my sister, my flesh and blood, start to fade was heartbreaking. I had to remind myself, I didn't poison her, they did. "Sophia?" I asked, my voice cutting through the chatter. "Are you okay?" She stood up, swaying. "I just need some air. I think the wine went to my—" She never finished the sentence. Her eyes rolled back, showing the whites, and she crumbled. It wasn't a graceful faint, it was a dead-weight collapse. She hit the floor with a sickening thud, knocking over her chair and shattering a crystal vase. Chaos erupted, screams, people scrambling back. The music screeched to a halt. "Sophia!" my mother shrieked, finally breaking her composure. She threw herself onto the floor beside her. "Call 911! Someone call an ambulance!" I was already there. I knelt on the other side of Sophia. Her skin was cold and clammy, a classic sign of chemical shock. Her lips were already turning a faint shade of blue. Her breathing was ragged, shallow gasps, like she was drowning in air. I looked up and caught Emily's eye across the table. She was still filming. I gave her a tiny nod. "Don't stop." "Move! Let me through!" My father was pushing guests aside, trying to take control. "It's just dehydration. She's been working too hard. Everyone, please, step back." He was still trying to spin it. Even with his daughter dying on the floor, he was thinking about PR. He was thinking about stock prices. "It's not dehydration!" I shouted, my voice ringing out clear and authoritative. I grabbed Sophia's wrist, checking her pulse. It was erratic, thready. "Her heart is in arrhythmia. Look at her pupils. They're pinpointed. This is a toxic reaction." "Shut up, Harper," my father roared. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I yelled back. "Call the paramedics and tell them to bring a crash cart and high-dose atropine. Now!" The guests were staring at me, stunned. They had only ever known me as the quiet, disappointment daughter. They had never seen the scientist. They had never seen the woman who had spent months hunting down industrial crimes. The ambulance arrived in record time, thank God for rich neighborhoods. The paramedics rushed in, pushing the crowd back. "What's the status?" the lead medic shouted, dropping a bag beside us. "Female, 25, sudden collapse." I rattled off the info before my parents could speak. "Symptoms consistent with acute chemical poisoning, respiratory distress, bradycardia flipping to tachycardia." The medic looked at me, surprised by the terminology. "Did she take anything? Drugs? Medication?" My father stepped in, his face gray. She had a glass of wine, that's it. My daughter doesn't do drugs. It must be a food allergy. It's not an allergy, I said, locking eyes with the medic. Listen to me carefully. I believe she has ingested a synthetic compound called cyclopentylamine derivative 47. It's an experimental cardiac agent. It attacks the nervous system and causes rapid heart failure. The medic froze for a second. That's very specific. I'm an environmental biologist, I lied. Well, half-lied. I've been tracking industrial contaminants. I know the symptoms. If you don't treat her for chemical toxicity, she will go into cardiac arrest within 5 minutes. The medic didn't argue. He saw the conviction in my eyes. He saw Sophia's blue lips. Let's move. Get the atropine ready. Notify the ER we have a hazmat situations potentially. They loaded Sophia onto the stretcher. My mother was sobbing hysterically now, clutching my father's arm. But it wasn't the sobbing of a grieving mother. It was the sobbing of a guilty one. I'm coming with her, I stated, climbing into the back of the ambulance. Family only, the driver said. I am family, I said cold, and I'm the only one who knows what's in her blood. My parents tried to follow, but the police had just arrived at the hotel entrance. Sir, ma'am, we need to get statements, an officer said, blocking my father's path. My daughter is dying, my father bellowed. And this young lady says she knows why, the medic yelled back, pointing at me. We need to go, now. The door slammed shut. As the siren wailed and we tore through the Chicago streets, I held Sophia's hand. She was unconscious, a ventilator mask strapped to her face. You're going to be okay, I whispered to her, tears finally stinging my eyes. I'm sorry I had to use you, but it was the only way to save us both. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, it was a war zone. They wheeled Sophia straight into the trauma bay. I stood just outside the curtain, listening to the machines beep frantically. Heart rate dropping. 40. 35. Push 1 milligram of epinephrine. She's crashing. I gripped the doorframe, my fingernails digging into the wood. Please don't die. Please don't die. If she died, my parents would win. They would paint me as a murderer. They would say I poisoned the glass. A doctor rushed out, ripping off his gloves. He saw me standing there. You're the sister? The one who identified the compound? Yes, is she? We stabilized her, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Barely. You were right about the symptoms. We treated it as an organophosphate poisoning mixed with a beta blocker overdose, which is essentially what that compound mimics. If you hadn't told us, we would have treated it as a standard heart attack. We would have lost her. I let out a breath I had been holding for 3 hours. She was alive, but the night wasn't over. About 20 minutes later, my parents burst into the waiting room. They looked disheveled. My mother's mascara was running. My father looked like he had aged 10 years. Where is she? My mother demanded. Where is my daughter? She's in the ICU, I said calmly, sitting on a plastic chair. She's stable. My father marched over to me, grabbing my arm. His grip was painful. You little witch. What did you tell them? What lies are you spinning? I stood up and shoved him back, hard. Don't touch me.
You poisoned her, he hissed, lowering his voice so the nurses wouldn't hear. You switched the glasses. I saw you.
Oh, you saw me? I raised my eyebrows. So you admit you knew which glass was poisoned. You admit you knew there was poison in the first place. He stopped, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He realized he had walked right into it. That's right, Dad, I said, stepping closer. I know everything. I know about the West facility. I know about the illegal dumping. And I know you plan to kill me tonight to stop me from getting my inheritance. You have no proof, he sneered, regaining his composure. You're a delusional girl who is jealous of her sister. No one will believe you. Excuse me? We all turned. Standing there were 2 police detectives and a man in a suit who looked very much like federal law enforcement. Richard Lee? Victoria Lee? The lead detective asked. Yes, my father straightened his tie. Thank God you're here. My daughter Harper, this girl right here, she tried to kill her sister. She's mentally unstable. I want her arrested immediately. The detective didn't look at me, he looked at my father. We've already spoken to the paramedics, and we've spoken to a Ms. Emily Chen, who provided us with a very interesting video file. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. Video? My father scoffed. A video of a toast? That proves nothing. It proves your wife slipped a powder into a glass, the detective said dryly, and it proves you handed that specific glass to Harper, and it proves Harper handed it to Sophia. But more importantly, we have the initial toxicology report from the hospital lab. The federal agent stepped forward. Mr. Lee, I'm Agent Miller with the FBI. The substance found in your daughter's blood is a match for a restricted compound currently under investigation at your company. We've been watching Lee Pharmaceuticals for 6 months regarding environmental fraud. Attempted murder of a federal witness, which Harper effectively is, given her evidence, is a whole new ballgame. Federal witness? My father's face went white. I sent my data to the EPA and the FBI 3 days ago, I said softly. I didn't just keep it on a hard drive, Dad. I mailed it. I knew you were coming for me. The silence in that hallway was heavy enough to crush bones. My father looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in my life. He didn't see the disappointed daughter anymore. He saw the person who had just beaten him at his own game. You ungrateful, he started, lunging at me. That's enough! The detectives grabbed him. Richard Lee, Victoria Lee, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and reckless endangerment. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around my mother's wrists, she started screaming. It was him! It was Richard! He made me do it! I didn't want to! Shut up, Victoria, my father shouted as they dragged him away. I stood there in the middle of the hallway, watching my family be dismantled. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't like winning a race. It felt empty. But it was over. Or so I thought. The next few days were a blur of legal depositions, news crews camping on my lawn, and endless questioning. The story was everywhere. Billionaire parents try to poison daughter, get other daughter instead. It was sensational. But the hardest part was facing Sophia. She woke up 2 days later. I was sitting by her bed reading a book. She looked frail, hooked up to monitors, her skin still pale. Harper? She croaked. I put the book down. Hey, don't try to talk too much. Your throat is probably raw. She looked at me, her eyes filled with confusion. The police came. They asked me questions. They said Mom and Dad did this? I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had dreaded. Sophia had spent her whole life believing she was the princess in a fairy tale. I was about to tell her she was actually living in a horror movie. They didn't mean to hurt you, Soph, I said gently. The glass, it was meant for me. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. Tears leaked out of the corners of her eyes. Because of the money? The money, the company, the crimes I uncovered. I explained everything. The dumping, the grandmother's trust, the conversation I overheard in the study. I thought she would be angry at me. I thought she would blame me for handing her the glass. I was ready for her to scream, "You used me as a shield!" Instead, she turned her head and looked at me with a fierce, burning intensity I had never seen in her before. They were going to kill you, she whispered, my little sister. Yeah, and they used me to do it. They made me the golden child just so I would be blind to who they really were. She clenched her fist around the bedsheet. I defended them, Harper, for years. I told you that you were just being difficult. I told you that you should just listen to them. You didn't know, I said. Ignorance isn't an excuse, she said, her voice cracking. Not anymore. She took a shaky breath. Where are they? County jail, no bail. The judge considered them a flight risk. Good, Sophia said, and the way she said it sent a shiver down my spine. It was the voice of a Lee woman, cold, decisive, but this time directed at the right target. I want to testify. Sophia, you don't have to. I want to testify, she repeated firmly. I want to look them in the eye and tell the jury exactly what it felt like to drink that wine. I want to tell them how it felt to have my heart stop because my father cared more about his stock options than his daughters. We sat there in silence for a while, just holding hands. The two sisters who were never supposed to be on the same side, finally united by the wreckage of our family. But the legal battle wasn't going to be easy. My father had hired a dream team of defense attorneys. They were already spinning the narrative in the press. They were claiming I was a mentally unstable, jealous sibling who had spiked the drink myself to frame my parents. They were digging up everything: my bad grades in middle school, my moody teenage years, even a parking ticket I got in college. They were trying to paint me as the villain. And the scary part? Some people were believing it. A week later, I was back at my grandmother's house, now my house. I was going through the boxes of evidence the FBI had seized from the company. Since I was the whistleblower, I was working closely with the prosecution. I found a file marked Project R17 Human Trials. My blood ran cold. The drug wasn't just tested on animals. There were names, dates, locations. They had been testing this poison on people in homeless shelters, people who wouldn't be missed, and the results were listed in cold clinical detail. Subject 14, cardiac arrest, deceased, disposal, cremation. I felt sick. This was so much bigger than just me and Sophia. My father was a mass murderer. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello? Harper Lee? The voice was distorted, robotic. Who is this? You think you've won because your parents are in a cell? The voice rasped. The Lee empire isn't just two people, Harper. There are stakeholders. There are investors. There are people who stand to lose billions if this trial goes forward. Is this a threat? I asked, grabbing a pen to write down the time. It's a promise, the voice said. Drop the case. Recant your statement. Tell the world it was an accident, or Sophia won't be the only one who ends up in a hospital bed. Next time there won't be an antidote. The line went dead. I stood there in the dark living room, looking out at the black water of Lake Michigan. They were scared. I could feel it. They were trying to intimidate me because they knew I had the smoking gun, but they forgot one thing. I wasn't the scared little girl hiding in her room anymore. I was Margaret's granddaughter. I was the girl who had stared down a poisoned glass of wine and smiled. I dialed the FBI agent's number. Agent Miller, it's Harper. Get a tracer on my line, and get a detail over to the hospital to watch Sophia. We're going to war. The trial of the century. That's what the newspapers called it. But for me, walking into that federal courthouse every morning wasn't about headlines. It was about survival. 9 months had passed since the night on the rooftop. 9 months of legal maneuvering, death threats, and living in a safe house with Sophia. The anonymous caller I told you about? The FBI traced it back to a shell company owned by my father's fixer. It was the final nail in the coffin, proving they were trying to obstruct justice even from behind bars. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken by reporters, former employees of Lee Pharmaceuticals, and the families of the victims who had lived along the polluted Calumet River. When I walked in, a hush fell over the room. I could feel their eyes on me. Some looked at me with pity, some with admiration, and some, the ones on my parents' payroll, with pure venom. My parents sat at the defense table. They looked different. The prison uniforms had replaced the Armani suits. My mother's hair, usually dyed a rich chestnut, was showing gray at the roots. My father looked gaunt. But their eyes? Their eyes were the same. Cold. Arrogant. They still believed they were untouchable. They still believed that money could buy their way out of murder. The defense attorney, a man named Mr. Sterling, who charged $1,000 an hour, stood up. His strategy was simple: destroy Harper Lee. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Sterling began, pacing in front of the box, you will hear a fantastic story from the prosecution, a story of poison and spies. But ask yourself, isn't it more likely that a jealous, estranged daughter, a girl who felt overshadowed by her successful sister, staged this entire event to get her hands on a $10 million inheritance? He pointed a finger at me. Harper Lee isn't a victim. She's a mastermind. I sat there, stone-faced. I didn't flinch. I let him spin his lies, because I knew what I had in my pocket. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand. I swore on the Bible. I looked straight at the jury. I didn't want the money, I told them, my voice steady. I wanted the truth. I found chemicals in the river that didn't just kill fish, they killed the future of that community. And when I tried to stop it, my parents tried to stop me. Sterling tried to rattle me during cross-examination. Ms. Lee, isn't it true you resented your sister? Isn't it true you felt unloved? I did feel unloved, I answered honestly, because I was. But I never hated my sister. I pitied her. She was a trophy. I was just the spare parts. The jury leaned in. They connected with that. They saw the pain behind the strength. But the real turning point, the moment that shattered my parents' defense, wasn't my testimony. It was Sophia's. When Sophia took the stand, the air in the room changed. She was still thin, still recovering from the damage the poison had done to her heart. She walked slowly, but her head was high. My mother started weeping softly, a performance for the jury. "Oh, my poor baby," she sobbed. Sophia didn't even look at her. "Ms. Lee," the prosecutor asked, "can you tell us what happened on the night of December 12th? Sophia took a deep breath. "My father poured a glass of wine. He told everyone it was a special vintage, just for Harper. My sister handed it to me as a gesture of love, and I drank it. And then? And then my heart stopped." Sophia paused, her voice trembling slightly. "I remember the pain. It felt like fire in my veins. But the worst pain wasn't the poison. It was waking up in the hospital and realizing who had put it there." She turned to face our parents. For the first time, my father couldn't meet her gaze. He looked down at his hands. "You knew," Sophia said, directly to them. The judge didn't stop her. "You knew that glass was toxic, and when I drank it, you didn't scream. You didn't knock it out of my hand. You just watched. You were so afraid of getting caught that you were willing to let your favorite daughter die right in front of you." "Objection!" Sterling shouted. "The witness is speculating." "Overruled," the judge said sharply. "The witness is stating her experience." Sophia wiped a tear from her cheek. "They aren't parents. They are CEOs of a family business that dealt in death, and I am resigning." You could hear a pin drop. That was the moment the empire crumbled, not with a bang, but with a daughter's resignation. But we had one more card to play, the smoking gun. The prosecutor projected an email onto the screen. It was the one I had found in the encrypted files, the one confirmed by the FBI's forensic team. It was from my father to the head of the research division, sent 2 years ago regarding the drug cyclopentylamine derivative 47. I read it along with the jury. The text was huge on the screen. Subject: clinical failures. Message: the adverse reactions in the homeless shelter trials are regrettable but irrelevant. Eliminate the data. Bury the bodies if you have to. If this drug doesn't get FDA approval, we lose the stock bump. Fix it. RL. Bury the bodies. The gasp that went through the courtroom was audible. My father closed his eyes. My mother stopped her fake crying and stared blankly at the table. It was over. The mask was off. They weren't just bad parents. They were monsters. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, reckless endangerment, fraud, environmental crimes. The judge looked at them with zero sympathy. "Richard and Victoria Lee, you have violated the most sacred trust of nature, the bond between parent and child. You sacrificed your humanity for profit. I sentence you both to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole." As the bailiffs handcuffed them, my mother screamed. She screamed my name. "Harper, you did this! You ungrateful brat! I gave you life!" I watched them drag her away. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. For the first time in 23 years, the weight was gone. The aftermath was messy but necessary. The government seized Lee Pharmaceuticals. The assets were frozen. The company was dissolved. But Margaret's trust fund, the $10 million, that was mine. And the court ruled that since my parents' assets were seized to pay for the environmental cleanup, a portion of the remaining family estate went to Sophia as victim compensation. We didn't keep the money. Well, not for Ferraris and mansions. I remember the day we walked into the old lakeside house, my grandmother's house. It was just me and Sophia. The dust sheets were still on the furniture. "What do we do now?" Sophia asked, sitting on a covered sofa. "Who are we? We're not the Lee sisters anymore. That name is poison." "We redefine it," I said. "We make the name mean something else." And we did. We used the money to start the Margaret Foundation. Our mission was simple: clean up the mess our parents made. We funded the restoration of the Calumet River. We paid for the medical bills of every family affected by the toxic dumping. We set up scholarships for students who wanted to study environmental law and ethics. Sophia went back to school. She didn't go for business this time. She went to law school. She wanted to be the prosecutor who put people like our father behind bars. She was ferocious in her studies. The golden child was gone. In her place was a warrior. And me? I finally got to be Harper. Just Harper. I spent my days in the field, literally. I worked with the cleanup crews. I tested the water. And slowly, year by year, I watched the river come back to life. I saw fish return to the waters that used to be dead zones. I saw kids playing on the banks again. 3 years later, I was invited to speak at a global conference in Geneva on corporate ethics. I stood on that stage, looking out at a sea of faces. I wasn't the scared girl at the graduation party anymore. I wore a suit that I bought with my own money. I didn't have a speech prepared. I just spoke from the heart. I used to think that family was destiny, I told them. I thought that because I carried the blood of Richard and Victoria Lee, I was destined to be like them, or destined to be their victim. I paused, thinking of Sophia, who was sitting in the front row beaming at me. But I learned a hard lesson. Blood is just biology. Love is a choice. Loyalty is a choice. My parents chose power, they chose greed, and they lost everything. I chose truth. It cost me my parents. It cost me the life I thought I was supposed to have. But it gave me something better. It gave me a real family. It gave me a sister who stands by me, not because she has to, but because she wants to. I looked directly into the camera, knowing this would be broadcast online. So if you're watching this, and you feel trapped by the expectations of people who claim to love you, if you feel like a shadow in your own life, listen to me. You have the power to step into the light. You have the power to break the cycle. It won't be easy. You might have to walk through fire. But on the other side is freedom. I walked off that stage to a standing ovation, but the applause didn't matter. What mattered was the hug Sophia gave me backstage. "Grandma would be proud," she whispered. "Yeah," I smiled. "She would." Tonight, as I record this final part of my story, I'm sitting on the porch of the lake house. The sun is setting over Lake Michigan, painting the water in shades of gold and violet. It's quiet. No reporters, no sirens, just the sound of the waves and the wind in the trees. My parents are in a concrete cell, staring at a blank wall. I am here, breathing clean air, drinking a glass of wine, safe, untainted wine, and watching the stars come out. I survived. We survived. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Your worth is not defined by your family. It's not defined by your bank account. It is defined by what you do when the glass is placed in front of you. Do you drink the poison, or do you find the courage to pour it out and start over? My name is Harper Lee, and this is my new beginning. Agent Miller, it's Harper. Get a tracer on my line, and get a detail over to the hospital to watch Sophia. We're going to war.